The ground had been frozen solid for 6 weeks. Nothing short of dynamite would break through it. But Evelyn Hale kept swinging that shovel anyway. Her baby daughter Clara had died 3 days ago. Fever took her in the night, while Evelyn rode 8 miles through darkness to fetch a doctor who arrived too late. Now she stood alone in a Wyoming cemetery, trying to bury her child in earth as hard as stone. Her gloves were worn through. Her arms were shaking. Tears had frozen on her cheeks like tracks of ice. 2 hours. She had been at this for 2 hours, and she had barely scratched the surface. No one came. No neighbors. No help. Just a mother and a tiny pine coffin and impossible frozen ground. Then she heard hoofbeats. A rancher named Luke Hartwell rode into that cemetery, looked at the small coffin, looked at her trembling hands, and without a single word, he took the shovel from her grip. He didn't ask questions. He didn't offer empty comfort. He just started digging. This is the story of how grief brought two broken people together, and how love grew from the coldest, hardest ground imaginable. Value statement. This story proves that you cannot protect yourself from loss by refusing to love, and that the bravest thing a broken heart can do is choose to open again. If you've ever felt frozen by grief, wondering if your heart could ever feel warmth again, this story will remind you that spring always comes. Drop a comment and tell me, has someone ever helped you through your darkest moment without being asked? Subscribe now and stay until the very end. Evelyn's journey from that frozen cemetery to finding joy again will leave you believing in second chances. Luke Hartwell had been riding fence lines for 20 years, but he had never seen anything quite like this. The morning was bitter cold, the kind of cold that made breath freeze in the air and turned the Wyoming prairie into an endless sea of white. His horse picked its way carefully along the northwestern boundary of his ranch, hooves crunching through the crust of snow that had hardened overnight. Luke's mind was on ordinary things: cattle counts, hay stores, the calving season coming in March. The sky hung low and gray above him, promising more snow by nightfall. Then he saw her. A small, dark figure in the valley cemetery below, struggling with something. Luke reined in his horse and squinted against the glare of sunlight on snow. Even from a quarter-mile away, he could see the futility of what she was attempting. The ground had been frozen solid for 6 weeks straight. Nothing short of dynamite would break through it now. He urged his horse forward, and recognition dawned as he drew closer. Evelyn Hale, the widow who had settled a hard-scrabble claim about 2 miles east last autumn. He had seen her in town once or twice, always alone, always with that look of fierce determination that came from having no choice but to be strong. Folks in town whispered about her, a woman alone on the frontier. Some said she was foolish. Others said she was brave. Most just figured she would not last the winter. She did not hear him approach. The wind carried sound away across the empty prairie, swallowing the crunch of his horse's hooves in the snow. Luke dismounted slowly, leading his horse the last 30 yards on foot. That was when he saw the small pine coffin resting in the snow beside her. His chest tightened so hard he could barely breathe. Evelyn swung the shovel again, putting her whole body into it. The frozen earth yielded nothing. The blade rang against ground as hard as stone, sending shockwaves up the handle that Luke could see jar her shoulders even from where he stood. She staggered, caught herself, and raised the shovel again. Her coat was thin. Her gloves were worn through at the fingers. She had been at this for hours, he realized. Hours of striking frozen earth and getting nowhere. "Ma'am," Luke said quietly. Evelyn spun around, shovel raised like a weapon. Her face was gray with exhaustion and cold. Dark circles shadowed her eyes like bruises. She had been crying, but the tears had frozen on her cheeks, leaving tracks of ice that caught the winter light. "I do not need help," she said. Her voice cracked on the words, breaking apart like thin ice. Luke looked at the tiny coffin, at the impossible earth. at her trembling hands wrapped around that shovel handle. He had buried people before. His sister, his father, neighbors and friends. He knew what that small pine box meant. He knew what she was facing. He stepped forward and gently took the shovel from her grip. She did not fight him. Her hands fell to her sides like they had simply given up. "Let me," he said. Evelyn sank to her knees beside the coffin. One hand reached out and rested on its rough pine surface. Fingers splayed like she was trying to feel something through the wood. She did not speak. Luke did not ask questions. He positioned himself over the spot she had been working and drove the shovel down with all his strength. The ground resisted, then gave slightly. Just a crack, just an inch. But it was something. He worked the blade back and forth, loosening a chunk of frozen dirt the size of his fist. It was going to take hours. He set his jaw and kept digging. The only sounds were his shovel striking earth, his breathing growing heavier with effort, and the wind moving through the bare branches of a cottonwood tree at the cemetery's edge. That wind sounded almost like crying. Or maybe that was just the widow, her shoulders shaking silently as she kept vigil over her daughter. An hour passed. Luke's shoulders burned. Sweat soaked through his shirt and then froze against his skin. He had cleared maybe 18 inches of depth. Not nearly enough, but progress. The sound of approaching horses made him look up. Miguel and old Thomas, two of his hired hands, rode into the cemetery. They must have come looking for him when he did not return on schedule. They took in the scene with one glance. Luke digging, the woman kneeling, the small coffin in the snow. Miguel dismounted without a word. He walked to his saddlebag and pulled out a pickaxe he had brought along for fence work. Old Thomas followed, reaching for an extra shovel strapped to his own horse. Together, the three men began working, taking turns with shovel and pick. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. Some things were beyond words. Three men digging a grave for a child they had never known. One woman keeping vigil beside a daughter she would never see grow up. The hole deepened slowly. 2 feet, 3 feet, deep enough. Miguel stepped back first, removing his hat. Old Thomas and Luke did the same. The grave was ready. Evelyn stood on legs that trembled so badly Luke thought she might fall. She bent and lifted the small coffin herself. It was so light. That was the cruelty of it. Clara had weighed almost nothing even alive. In death, she was lighter still. Luke moved forward to help, but Evelyn shook her head. "I need to do this part myself," she whispered. She knelt at the grave's edge and lowered the coffin with shaking arms. The pine box settled on frozen earth with a soft sound that seemed too quiet for something so final. Evelyn stayed kneeling there, staring down into the hole. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. A mother saying goodbye to her daughter. A prayer, maybe. Or just the words she had never gotten to say. Luke had seen grief before. He had lost his own sister to scarlet fever when he was 12 years old. He had watched his father dig her grave. He had watched his mother stop speaking for 3 months afterward, her voice locked away somewhere she could not reach. He had stood at graves of friends, neighbors, hired men killed in accidents. But this, a mother burying her only child alone in January snow, this was something different. He reached into his coat and pulled out the worn Bible he always carried. The pages were soft from use, creased at familiar passages. His hands were stiff with cold as he found the verses he wanted. "Ma'am," he said gently, "if you would permit me." Evelyn looked up at him with eyes that had gone empty, like someone had blown out a candle behind them. She nodded once. Luke cleared his throat. His voice came out steady, the way it did when he was gentling a spooked horse or calming frightened cattle. "He shall feed his flock like a shepherd," Luke read. "He shall gather the lambs with his arm and carry them in his bosom." The words came from Isaiah. They felt small against the weight of what was happening, but they were all he had to offer. He continued, reading verses about children in heaven, about comfort for those who mourn, about a God who sees every sparrow fall. Miguel and Thomas stood with their heads bowed. The wind had died down, leaving an eerie stillness. Luke's voice was the only sound in the frozen cemetery. "The Lord is nigh unto them that are of a broken heart," he read, "and saveth such as be of a contrite spirit." When he finished, he closed the Bible carefully. The silence that followed felt sacred somehow. Holy, even. Luke nodded to his men. Together they began filling the grave, working gently, respectfully. Miguel found 2 sturdy pine branches and lashed them together with leather cord from his saddle, forming a simple cross. The mound of earth grew. Luke patted it smooth with the back of his shovel. Miguel placed the cross at its head, driving it deep enough to withstand any wind. "She will need a proper stone come spring," old Thomas said quietly. "I can carve one." "That would be good," Luke replied. Evelyn had not moved. She stood beside the fresh grave with her arms wrapped around herself, staring at the turned earth like she expected it to open back up, like she was waiting for this to be a dream she could wake from. The sun was dropping toward the western horizon. Once darkness fell, the temperature would plummet even further. Staying out here would be dangerous. Luke glanced at his men. They understood without words. "We will head back to the ranch," Miguel said. He touched his hat brim toward Evelyn. "Ma'am, you have our deepest sympathies." Old Thomas nodded his agreement. They mounted their horses and rode off, leaving Luke alone with the widow. "Where is your place?" Luke asked. 2 miles east," Evelyn said. Her voice sounded distant, like it was coming from somewhere far away. "I will follow you home. Make sure you get there safe." She turned to look at him. For a moment he thought she might refuse. Pride was written all over her face, stubborn and defiant even through the grief. But then something in her seemed to break, and she just nodded. She walked to her horse tied at the cemetery fence. She mounted stiffly, moving like a woman 3 times her age. Luke swung onto his own horse and followed as she rode out of the cemetery. He kept his distance, not crowding her, giving her space for whatever thoughts were filling her head. The sun set behind them as they rode, painting the snow in shades of orange and pink and gold. Under different circumstances, it would have been beautiful. But beauty felt wrong today. The whole world should have been gray. Luke could see Evelyn's shoulders shaking as she rode, silent sobs that she would not let him hear. She kept her back straight, her head high, even as grief tore through her. She would not let herself fall apart in front of a stranger. That kind of strength, Luke thought. That was something special. Her cabin came into view after half an hour of riding. A small structure tucked against a hillside for wind protection. Smoke rose from the chimney. She must have left a fire burning before she came to the cemetery this morning. Smart. The cabin would be warm when she returned. Evelyn dismounted and went inside without looking back. A moment later, lamplight appeared in the single window. Luke waited until he was certain she was safe, until the door was closed and the light was steady. Then he turned his horse toward home. Inside the cabin, Evelyn sat down at her table without removing her coat. Her hands lay flat on the rough wooden surface. She could not feel them, could not feel anything. 3 days ago, Clara had been alive. Feverish, yes, burning up with a fever that would not break, but alive. Crying and squirming and fighting against the sickness the way babies do. Evelyn had ridden 8 miles through darkness to fetch Dr. Morrison from town, her infant daughter wrapped in blankets and burning hot against her chest. The doctor had followed her back as fast as his horse could carry him. But by the time they arrived, Clara's breathing had changed. By dawn, she was gone. The doctor had been kind. He had helped Evelyn wash Clara's tiny body, had wrapped her in clean linen, had spoken soft words about God's plan and heaven's angels, and how some souls were just too precious for this world. Then he had left, promising to send word to the neighbors. But no one had come. It was January, the hardest month. Everyone was fighting their own battles against the brutal winter, their own cattle to feed, their own water to haul, their own children to keep warm and alive. Evelyn understood. She had always understood. When her husband Daniel died under a fallen timber 14 months ago, neighbors had helped at first. They brought food, offered assistance with chores. But frontier kindness had limits. People had their own lives, their own troubles. Eventually, everyone drifted back to their own concerns. She had learned to manage alone, taught herself to handle the work Daniel used to do, feeding cattle, mending fence, hauling water from the creek when it was not frozen solid. She had been proud of her independence. When she discovered she was carrying Daniel's child, she had been terrified and grateful both. A piece of him, still alive, still growing inside her. Clara had been born in May, delivered by a midwife from a neighboring claim. The woman had stayed 2 days to make sure mother and baby were both healthy, then left. Evelyn and Clara, alone together. It had been enough, more than enough, until 3 nights ago. Evelyn had built the coffin herself. She had measured it carefully, using pine boards that Daniel had saved for building a crib. The irony was not lost on her. Wood meant for her daughter's bed, used instead for her daughter's grave. She had lined the coffin with fabric from her wedding dress, white linen, carefully cut and sewn. Clara deserved something beautiful for her final rest. This morning she had loaded the coffin onto her wagon and driven to the cemetery alone. She had unloaded it herself. She had picked up the shovel with grim determination, fully intending to dig the grave without help from anyone. But the ground had defeated her. After 2 hours of futile effort, her arms shaking, her hands blistered even through her gloves, she had made almost no progress. The earth was simply too frozen. And then he had appeared. Luke Hartwell, the rancher. She knew his name from town. He ran one of the larger spreads in the territory, had a reputation for fair dealing and quiet competence. He had taken the shovel from her without hesitation, had not asked questions or offered empty words. He had just dug. When his men arrived, they had dug too. 3 strangers working in the cold to help her bury her daughter. The kindness of it broke something inside her. All the fierce independence she had built up over the past year, all the walls she had constructed to survive alone. They crumbled in the face of simple human compassion. Evelyn finally moved. She pulled off her coat with stiff fingers. Her hands were numb. Her feet, too. She added wood to the stove and stood as close to it as she could bear. But the cold she felt was not the kind that heat could touch. Tomorrow she would wake up and Clara would still be gone. The day after that, the same. And the day after that. An endless succession of days stretching into years, each one without her daughter. She thought about the rancher reading from his Bible, the steadiness of his voice, the way he had stayed until the grave was filled and marked with a cross, the way he had followed her home to make sure she arrived safely. Maybe surviving alone was not the same as living. Maybe there was another way. But tonight she was too tired to think about it. Tonight, all she could do was sit by the stove and let the tears come. Luke returned the next morning. He told himself it was just the decent thing to do. A widow alone in winter just buried her child. Anyone with a conscience would check on her. It was not personal. It was not anything other than basic human decency. He brought a wagon loaded with split firewood and a sack of supplies from his ranch stores. Flour, coffee, salt pork. The things a person needed to survive but might forget to gather when grief was eating them alive. Evelyn heard the wagon approaching and stepped outside. The day was bright, sun glinting off fresh snow that had fallen overnight. Everything looked clean and new, which felt wrong somehow. The world had no right to be so beautiful when her daughter was not in it. "Morning," Luke said, touching his hat brim. "I brought some firewood, thought you might be running low." "I have enough," Evelyn said. The words came out automatically. The response she had trained herself to give any time anyone offered help. Independence was armor. She wore it like a second skin. "Then you will have more," Luke replied. He began unloading without waiting for permission. Evelyn watched him for a moment, pride warring with exhaustion. She thought about arguing. thought about sending him away. But her arms still ached from yesterday's futile digging, and the woodpile by her cabin wall was lower than she had admitted. She walked over and began helping him stack the logs. They worked in silence. It was not uncomfortable. Luke seemed content to let quiet exist without filling it with empty chatter, and Evelyn found she did not mind the company. When the wagon was empty, Luke walked toward her barn. The door was hanging crooked on its hinges, she knew. Had been for 2 weeks now. "Your barn door needs fixing," he observed. "Hinge looks broken." "Yes, I have been meaning to repair it. I will do it now if you have spare hardware." She showed him where Daniel's tools were kept. The sight of them still hurt, even after 14 months. Daniel's hands had touched every one of those tools. His sweat had worn the wooden handles smooth. Luke worked efficiently, removing the broken hinge and replacing it with one from Daniel's collection. The door swung smoothly when he finished. "Thank you," Evelyn said. The words felt inadequate. "Coffee, if you have it?" Luke asked. She nodded and led him to the cabin. Inside, she poured coffee from the pot on the stove, and they sat across from each other at her table. The same table where she had sat alone last night, frozen with grief. "Your cattle look thin," Luke said after a long sip of coffee. "You got enough hay to last the winter?" "Enough to get through." Evelyn's voice was defensive, but he was right. Her small herd was struggling. "I will bring some extra, no charge. Got surplus this year after losing fewer head than expected to the cold." She wanted to refuse. Pride demanded it, but pride would not feed her cattle through February and March. "That is generous," she said instead. They drank coffee in silence for a while. Luke did not seem to need constant conversation, which Evelyn appreciated. She was too tired for small talk, too empty for pleasantries. "The baby," Luke said finally. His voice was gentle. "What was her name?" "Clara." Luke nodded slowly. "Pretty name." "She was beautiful," Evelyn whispered. Her throat felt tight, like something was caught in it. She had Daniel's eyes, gray like storm clouds. She was just starting to laugh. Really laugh, you know. Not just those little baby sounds, but real laughter. She stopped talking. Saying Clara's name out loud made her reel again, made the loss sharper. "My sister died when she was 7, Luke said quietly. "Sarah. Scarlet fever took her in 3 days. I remember watching my father dig her grave. Remember thinking the ground should not be so hard when someone so soft was going into it." Evelyn looked up at him. For the first time since Clara's death, she felt something other than alone. "I am sorry," she whispered. "It was a long time ago," Luke said. "But you do not forget. You just learn to carry it." He finished his coffee and stood. "I will be back in a few days," he said. "Check on things. You do not have to, I know, but I will." He left with the same quiet efficiency he had arrived with. No fuss, no ceremony, just a man who did what needed doing and then moved on. Evelyn stood at her window, watching his wagon disappear over the ridge. Something had shifted inside her. A tiny crack in the wall of isolation she had built. 3 days later, Luke returned. He brought hay this time, helped her distribute it to her small herd. The cattle gathered around them, hungry and grateful. "She has a limp," Luke said, nodding toward a brown cow on the edge of the group. "How long?" "Since the last snow. She got her leg caught in some wire. Let me look at it." He examined the cow with gentle hands, feeling along her leg while the animal stood patient and trusting. "Not broken," he said finally, "just strained. Keep her warm and let her rest. She will heal." The next week, he brought lamp oil and more coffee. The week after that, he repaired a section of fence that wind had damaged. A pattern began to form. Every few days, Luke would arrive with some practical purpose. Fence to mend, wood to split, supplies to deliver. He never came empty-handed, never stayed too long, never made her feel like a charity case or a burden. They would share coffee, exchange a few words, fall into comfortable silence. Evelyn found herself watching for him on the days he usually came. The cabin felt emptier on the days he did not. One afternoon in late January, Luke noticed her fiddle hanging on the wall. It had belonged to her mother, brought west from Missouri years ago. "You play?" he asked. "Used to. Before. Before." That word carried so much weight now. Before Daniel died. Before Clara. Before her life fell apart. "Play something now?" Luke asked. Evelyn hesitated. She had not touched the fiddle since Clara got sick, had not wanted music in a world without her daughter. But something about the way Luke asked, calm and patient and without expectation, made her reach for it. Her fingers were stiff at first, clumsy on the strings. But muscle memory guided them, and soon a simple folk tune filled the cabin. Something her mother had taught her when she was just a girl. The notes chased away the silence, pushing into corners that had been dark for too long. When she finished, Luke was smiling. Just slightly. Just enough. "That was real fine," he said. "Beautiful. Do you play anything?" "Cannot carry a tune in a bucket," Luke admitted, "but I surely do like listening." She played another song, then another. Luke sat at her table drinking coffee, his eyes half closed, listening like music was water, and he had been wandering through a desert. For the first time since Clara died, Evelyn felt something other than grief. Not happiness. Not yet. But maybe the possibility of it somewhere far down the road. When Luke left that evening, Evelyn realized she had smiled. Just briefly. Just for a moment. But it had happened. The ice was beginning to thaw. February arrived with weather that could not make up its mind. Some days the sky stayed clear and temperatures rose enough to melt the snow. Other days brought fresh storms that buried the world in white again. Luke's visits had become routine by now. Evelyn expected him every 3 or 4 days. She started timing her chores so she would be near the cabin when he usually arrived. She told herself it was practical. If he was helping with heavy work, she should be available. But she knew it was more than that. They talked more now, small stories carefully offered like gifts. Luke told her about his ranch, about the horses he bred for mountain work. Strong stock that could handle Wyoming winters and steep terrain. "It is what my father started," he said one afternoon. They were in her barn, mending harness together. The smell of leather and horse was comfortable and familiar. He had this idea that you could breed for cold tolerance, sure feet, steady temperament altogether. Most folks thought he was crazy. Was he? Luke grinned. A little bit. But he was right, too. Took 20 years, but we have horses now that ranchers come from 3 territories away to buy. Evelyn found herself sharing things, too. Her life before Daniel died. How she had grown up in Missouri, daughter of a school teacher who loved books. How she had memorized poetry the way other children memorized Bible verses. "Never read much poetry myself," Luke admitted. "Do not have the schooling for it." "Schooling does not matter," Evelyn said. "Poetry is about feeling, not understanding. Read me some." She fetched her worn copy of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass from the shelf by her bed. The spine was cracked from use, pages soft with handling. She read aloud while they worked, her voice filling the barn. Luke's hands stilled on the leather. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Read that part again," he said. "About the grass." She did. His face grew thoughtful. "That is about death being part of life, is it not? About how nothing is really lost, just changed?" "I think so," Evelyn said softly. "I like that." Luke nodded slowly. "That is a comfort." They worked in silence after that, but it was a different kind of silence. Fuller, somehow. Evelyn realized she had told him things she had not spoken aloud since Daniel died. There was something about Luke that made words come easier. Something in the way he listened without judgment, without trying to fix or minimize. The next time he visited, she had fresh bread waiting. She had baked it that morning using the last of her good flour and honey she had been saving for something special. She told herself it was just practical. She needed bread anyway. But she had not made bread like this in months. Luke noticed right away. His eyes lit up when he tasted it. "This is the best bread I have had in ages," he said. "Maybe ever." "The men at your ranch do not bake?" Luke laughed. "They try. Results are mixed at best. Miguel makes tortillas that could stop bullets. Old Thomas burns everything he touches. Mostly we just eat simple." Evelyn laughed too. It surprised her, the sound of her own laughter. She had forgotten what it felt like. Had forgotten that her face knew how to make that shape. "I could teach them," she offered. "If you wanted." They would surely appreciate that. Luke paused, coffee cup halfway to his lips. "I know I would." Something in the air shifted. A current underneath their easy conversation. Something neither of them named, but both could feel. When Luke left that evening, he paused at his wagon. "Evelyn," he said. It was the first time he had used her given name. Not ma'am, not Mrs. Hale. Just Evelyn. She felt her heart skip in a way it had not in a very long time. "I am glad I rode past that cemetery back in January," Luke said. "So am I," Evelyn replied quietly. He nodded once and drove away. That night, lying in bed, Evelyn allowed herself to think about possibilities. About what it might mean that a good man had started visiting regularly. About whether her heart could risk opening again after losing so much. Clara's absence still ached like a wound that would not heal. But Luke's presence had become something she looked forward to. Something that made the days feel less empty. The two truths existed together. Grief and hope. Side by side. Maybe that was how healing worked, not forgetting what was lost, but making room for something new alongside the pain. She fell asleep with that thought, and for the first time in weeks, she did not dream of tiny coffins and frozen ground. The blizzard hit on February 15th. Luke saw it coming hours before it arrived. A dark wall of clouds building in the northwest, eating the horizon like a hungry mouth. The light had that particular quality that meant heavy snow and high winds. The air itself felt electric, charged with danger. He had planned to check on Evelyn that afternoon anyway. The approaching storm made it urgent. He rode fast, pushing his horse harder than usual. The wind was already picking up, temperature dropping by the minute. By the time he reached Evelyn's place, the first flakes were falling thick and fast. She was outside, struggling to drive her small herd of cattle toward the barn. The animals were spooked by the wind, scattering in every direction instead of gathering. Every time she got three moving the right way, two more would bolt. Luke dismounted and moved to help without wasting time on words. Together they worked, moving methodically around the herd, using their horses to push the frightened cattle toward shelter. Snow was falling so heavy now that Luke could barely see 20 feet ahead. The wind howled across the open prairie, driving snow horizontal, stinging any exposed skin like needles. They got the last cow into the barn just as the full force of the storm hit. The wind screamed so loud it drowned out every other sound. Luke could feel the temperature plummeting with every passing minute. He latched the barn door while Evelyn distributed hay to the huddled cattle. His horse whinnied nervously, eyes rolling at the sound of the wind. "Bring him inside!" Evelyn shouted over the roar. "There is room!" Luke led his horse into the barn, unsaddled him, and made sure he had feed and water. Through the barn walls, the storm sounded like a living thing trying to tear its way in. "You cannot ride home in this," Evelyn said. It was not a question. "No," Luke agreed. He looked around the barn. "I will wait it out here. Would not be the first time I slept in a barn." "Do not be foolish." "Come to the cabin." They made a run for it, bent nearly double against wind that tried to knock them off their feet. Snow got in their eyes, their mouths, down the collars of their coats. The cabin was only 30 yards from the barn. But by the time they stumbled through the door, they were both gasping and covered in white. Luke pushed the door shut against the wind while Evelyn threw more wood on the fire. The cabin was small. Just one room with a sleeping loft above. Luke's eyes found her bed in the corner, and beside it, Clara's empty cradle. A wave of awareness washed over him. They would be alone together. possibly for days. "I can sleep by the fire," he said quickly. "Will not be the first time." "There are blankets in the chest," Evelyn replied. She was being practical, treating this like any other situation that required hospitality. But it was not any other situation, and they both knew it. The storm raged all that day and through the night. Wind shook the cabin walls until Luke wondered if the whole structure might tear apart. Snow piled against the windows until they could not see outside at all. They moved around each other carefully in the small space, maintaining polite distance, speaking only when necessary. Luke whittled by the fire, working on nothing in particular, just keeping his hands busy. Evelyn mended clothes, her needle flashing in and out of fabric with practiced ease. The second day was worse. The storm intensified instead of dying down. Drifts climbed higher than the windows. The world had shrunk to this one small room and two people trying not to acknowledge what was building between them. They played cards to pass the time, read from Evelyn's small collection of books. Luke attempted to cook dinner and produced something edible, if unimpressive. Evelyn laughed at his efforts, then showed him how to do it properly. That night, the careful distance they had maintained finally broke. Luke woke in the darkness to the sound of crying. Not quiet tears, but harsh sobs that shook the whole cabin. The fire had burned low, casting flickering shadows across the walls. He lay still for a moment, uncertain. She was grieving. She deserved privacy. But the sobs continued, growing worse, becoming sounds of pain so raw they cut right through him. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "are you all right?" Stupid question. Of course she was not all right. "I am sorry." Her voice came muffled through tears. "I am so sorry. Go back to sleep." But Luke could not sleep through this. He stood and moved toward her bed. In the dim firelight, he could see her sitting up, arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold the pieces together. Her whole body shook. "Tell me," Luke said gently. He sat down on the floor beside her bed, keeping a respectful distance but close enough that she could feel his presence. "Tell me about her. Tell me about Clara." And she did. Everything came pouring out. Clara's birth and the joy of it, mixed with terror at the thought of raising a child alone. How Clara had started smiling at 2 months, this big gummy grin that lit up her whole face. How she had learned to grab things and always reached for Evelyn's hair, wrapping tiny fingers in the dark strands and pulling hard enough to bring tears to her mother's eyes. "The sound of her laugh," Evelyn whispered. "It was the most beautiful sound in the world, like bells, like water over stones." She told him about the fever that came so sudden and burned so hot, about the desperate ride through darkness to fetch the doctor, about standing over her daughter's cradle as Clara's breathing changed, became shallow, became... She could not finish that sentence. Luke listened without interrupting. He did not try to fix anything, did not offer empty comfort or meaningless platitudes about God's plan. He just listened, letting her pour out the poison of her grief so it would not fester inside her forever. When her words finally ran out, Luke spoke. "My sister Sarah," he said. "She was 7 when scarlet fever took her. 3 days from healthy to gone. I remember being so angry at God that I threw rocks at the church windows, broke 2 of them. My father whipped me for it, but I think he understood." He paused, gathering memories that still hurt after all these years. "My father was never the same after. He worked himself into an early grave trying to outrun the grief, and my mother, she just went quiet. Did not speak for 3 months, like the words had died along with Sarah." Evelyn reached out in the darkness and found his hand. "How did you survive it?" she asked. Luke thought carefully before answering. "I learned that loss changes you. There is no getting around that. But it does not have to destroy you. You make room for it inside yourself. Learn to carry it. The weight gets easier over time. Not lighter exactly. You just get stronger." "Does it ever stop hurting?" "No," Luke admitted. "But the hurt changes, becomes something you can live with instead of something that is killing you." They talked until dawn, the storm still raging outside. In the darkness and isolation, all defenses fell away. They were just two people who had known loss, finding comfort in shared understanding. When gray light finally crept through the snow-covered windows, they sat together in exhausted silence. Something had shifted between them. Some wall had come down. The third day, the storm began to break. Wind died to a whisper. Snow stopped falling. They could see patches of sky through the windows again. Luke prepared to leave. He saddled his horse in the barn while Evelyn made coffee for his journey. When he came to the cabin to collect it, the air between them felt charged with everything that remained unspoken. "Thank you," Evelyn said, "for listening. Thank you for letting me stay." Their eyes met and held. Luke felt himself take a step toward her before he caught himself. Whatever was building between them deserved time, deserved to develop naturally without the pressure of being trapped together by weather. Rushing it now would dishonor what they had shared. "I will be back when the roads are clear," he said. Evelyn nodded. "I will be here." Luke rode away without looking back, but he felt her watching from the window long after the cabin disappeared behind him. That night, alone in his own house, Luke admitted the truth to himself. He loved her. Not out of pity or obligation, not because she needed saving or because helping her made him feel important. He loved her strength and her stubbornness, her grief and her courage, the way she had survived things that would have broken most people. The question was what to do about it. The first week of March, Luke rode into town for supplies. Main Street was busier than he had seen it in months. The worst of winter had passed and folks were venturing out again. Wagons lined up outside the general store. Men gathered on the porch of the saloon, smoking and swapping stories about the storms they had survived. Luke tied his horse and went into the store. The bell above the door announced his entrance and conversation stopped. Then started again, quieter, with pointed glances in his direction. He gathered what he needed: coffee, flour, lamp oil, nails for fence repair. At the counter, Mrs. Agnes Thornton stood gossiping with the shopkeeper's wife. Both women wore expressions like they had just bitten into something sour. "Visiting that widow awful regular," Mrs. Thornton was saying, loud enough that Luke could not help but hear. "3 times a week, I heard, maybe more." "Well, she is alone out there," the shopkeeper's wife replied. "Someone ought to check on her." "Alone is one thing." Mrs. Thornton's voice dripped with implication. "But a man and a woman, unsupervised, no chaperone, people do talk." She caught sight of Luke watching and had the grace to flush slightly. But she did not back down. "Mr. Hartwell," she said sweetly, "we were just discussing your charitable work." The way she said charitable made it sound like something shameful. "Just being neighborly," Luke said evenly. "Of course." Though some might wonder at the propriety of it, a widower visiting a widow so often. People do wonder. Let them wonder, Luke said. He paid for his supplies and walked out. But outside he caught more whispers, more speculative looks. A group of women near the dressmaker's shop fell silent when he passed, then erupted in hushed conversation as soon as he was out of earshot. He rode home with their words eating at him, not the gossip itself. He had lived long enough to know that people talked about anything and everything, true or not. Small towns ran on rumor the way rivers ran on water. But something in their words made him examine himself. Why had he started visiting Evelyn? The honest answer was complicated. He had been drawn to her from that first moment in the cemetery. Something about her fierce determination, her refusal to give up even when the earth itself was fighting against her. But was that love, or was it something else? Something less worthy? Had he seen a woman in distress and made himself feel important by helping? Was he the kind of man who needed to be needed? Who sought out broken things so he could prove his own worth by fixing them? The questions gnawed at him all night. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, forcing himself to examine his motives with brutal honesty. Did he love Evelyn? Or did he just love how helping her made him feel? He stayed away. 1 week stretched into 2. He told himself he needed clarity, needed to be certain his feelings were genuine before involving her in his confusion. It would not be fair to pursue something if his heart was not truly in it. But staying away brought its own kind of clarity. He missed her. Not just the idea of her, but specifically her laugh, her voice reading poetry, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about Clara, the comfortable silences they had learned to share. He found himself thinking about her at odd moments, wondering if her fence was holding, if she had enough firewood, if she was still playing her fiddle in the evenings. Still, he did not go. If he could not be certain of his own heart, he had no right to involve her. Then Evelyn took the decision out of his hands. She rode into his ranch yard on a gray morning, her horse breathing hard from the journey. She sat straight in the saddle, that fierce determination written all over her face. "My milk cow is sick," she said without any greeting or small talk. "Bloated stomach, needs doctoring. I came to ask if you would look at her." Luke wiped his hands on his trousers, suddenly nervous in a way he had not felt in years. "Of course. Let me get my kit." They rode to her place in silence that felt nothing like the comfortable quiet they used to share. This silence was tense, expectant, like a storm waiting to break. The cow was indeed sick. Luke examined her carefully, feeling along her swollen belly. She got into some grain, he diagnosed. Ate too much, too fast. I can treat her. He mixed medicine and administered it while Evelyn watched. When he finished, the cow was already looking more comfortable. "She will recover," Luke said. "Keep her off feed for a day, then start her back slow." Evelyn pulled coins from her pocket. The payment she would have used for next month's supplies, he realized. She held them out to him. Luke started to refuse, then saw the pride in her face and thought better of it. He accepted the coins and pocketed them. They stood in her barn, the sick cow between them. Everything that needed saying hung unspoken in the air. "Why did you stop coming?" Evelyn asked finally. Her voice was even, but her eyes were not. Luke took a breath. Chose honesty. "Town gossip made me question my motives," he admitted. "Made me wonder if I was helping you for the right reasons, or just because it made me feel needed." "And what did you decide?" "That I needed to be certain. Certain I was not taking advantage of your grief, your vulnerability." Evelyn's expression went cold. Her spine straightened. When she spoke, her voice could have frozen water. "My vulnerability?" she repeated. "You think I am vulnerable? I think you have been through hell and back. I think any decent person would be careful not to make that worse." She was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her words cut like knives. "I have survived my husband's death," she said. "I have survived my daughter's death. I have survived this winter alone. I do not need your charity, Mr. Hartwell. If you come back, it must be because you want to, not because you feel obligated, not because helping me soothes your conscience. If you cannot be certain of that, then do not come back at all." She walked out of the barn without looking back. Luke stood frozen, her words hitting him like physical blows. She was right. She deserved better than his doubt. He found her at the cabin door. "You are right," he said. "You deserve certainty. I need time to figure out if I can give you that." Evelyn nodded once, her face carefully blank. "Then take your time." Luke rode home knowing he had hurt her, knowing she had wrapped her armor back around herself, tight and protective, but knowing, too, that she had told him the truth. If he came back, it had to be for the right reasons. Back at his ranch, Luke threw himself into hard physical labor, mending fences, moving cattle, working until exhaustion made thought impossible. But the questions followed him everywhere. Did he love her? Was it real love, grounded in respect and admiration? Or was it something else, something less worthy? The answer came on a bright morning a week later. He was working in the barn when he suddenly wanted to tell Evelyn about the new foal born overnight. Wanted to hear what she thought about the fence repair he was planning. Wanted to share coffee with her and sit in comfortable silence. He did not want to rescue her. He wanted to be with her. The distinction was everything. He loved her. Not perfectly, not without questions, but genuinely. And she deserved to know. April came to Wyoming like a promise finally kept. The snow melted in patches, revealing brown grass that would soon turn green. Creeks ran high with runoff, rushing and gurgling through valleys that had been silent with ice for months. Overhead, geese flew north in ragged formations, calling to each other across the brightening sky. Luke saddled his best horse and rode toward Evelyn's claim with his heart hammering against his ribs. He had rehearsed what he wanted to say 100 times. The words felt clumsy on his tongue no matter how he arranged them. But some things were too important to get perfect. Some things just needed to be said. The prairie was transforming around him as he rode. The first brave shoots of green pushed up where south-facing slopes caught the warming sun. Wildflowers would follow soon. The world was waking up after its long winter sleep. Evelyn's cabin came into view, and Luke's breath caught in his chest. She was outside working the garden plot beside her house. She had cleared away winter debris and was turning earth with a spade, preparing for spring planting. The same earth that had defeated her in January, frozen solid as stone. Now it yielded to her blade, dark and rich and full of possibility. Luke dismounted and tied his horse to the fence. Evelyn straightened when she saw him, one hand shading her eyes against the morning sun. She did not smile, but she did not send him away either. "Morning," Luke said. "Morning." He walked to the edge of the garden, watching her work. The earth turned over in neat furrows beneath her spade. "I have been thinking," Luke said, "about what you said, about certainty." Evelyn drove her spade into the ground and left it standing. She faced him fully, waiting. Luke had prepared a speech. He had practiced it until the words were worn smooth in his mind. But standing here, looking at her, all his careful preparation fell away. "I love you," he said simply. The words came out plain and direct. No poetry, no flourishes, just the truth. Not from pity, not from obligation. "I love your strength, your stubbornness, the way you refuse to give up even when everything is against you. I love how you read poetry and play fiddle. I love that you built a coffin for your daughter with your own hands because you wanted her to have something beautiful. I love that you do not need rescuing but are brave enough to accept help anyway." He paused to take a breath. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. "I know it has not been long since Clara died. I know you are still grieving. I am not asking you to stop grieving or rush into anything, but I wanted you to know my heart. And I wanted to ask if, when you are ready, if you are ever ready, you would consider becoming my wife." The silence stretched out between them. A meadowlark called from somewhere nearby. Wind moved through grass that was just beginning to show hints of green. "Why now?" Evelyn asked finally. "Because spring is coming. Because life keeps moving forward whether we are ready or not. Because I would rather tell you the truth and risk losing you than stay quiet and definitely lose you." Evelyn looked down at her garden, at the dark earth waiting for seeds. She was quiet for so long that Luke began to fear she would say no, that he had waited too long, that the damage from his weeks of doubt was too deep to repair. Then she looked up, and her eyes were wet. "I need to show you something," she said. She led him to the cemetery. They walked in silence, following a path that had become familiar to both of them over these long months. The Valley Cemetery looked different now than it had in January. Winter brown was giving way to spring green. The cottonwood tree showed the first hint of leaf buds, small and tight but full of promise. Water trickled somewhere nearby, snowmelt finding its way to lower ground. Clara's grave had settled over the winter. The wooden cross still stood straight and solid, weathered but strong. New grass was beginning to grow over the mound, soft and green. Evelyn knelt beside her daughter's grave. Luke stayed back, giving her space. "Clara," Evelyn said softly, "this is Luke, the man I told you about, the man who helped me when I could not help myself." Her voice broke slightly, and she paused to steady herself. "I need to tell you something, sweet girl. I am going to keep living, really living, not just surviving. And that means letting myself love someone again." She was quiet for a moment, one hand resting on the grass that covered her daughter. "I think you would have liked him," she whispered. Then she stood and turned to face Luke. Tears tracked down her face, but she was smiling, really smiling, the way he had not seen since before Clara died. "Yes," she said. Luke blinked. "Yes?" "When I am ready. Yes." The word hit him like sunlight breaking through clouds. He closed the distance between them and took her hands. They were work-roughened, calloused, capable hands. Hands that had built a coffin. Hands that had planted seeds. Hands that had learned to survive alone. "There is no rush," he said. "We will take whatever time you need. I know." She squeezed his hands. "That is why I said yes." They stood together beside Clara's grave, two people scarred by loss, choosing to risk love anyway. The spring sun warmed their faces. Birds sang in the cottonwood tree. Around them the world was turning green. Some things ended in frozen ground, but other things, better things, could grow from what remained. They married in May when the prairie was fully green and wildflowers dotted every hillside. It was a small ceremony held at Luke's ranch on a Sunday afternoon. Miguel and old Thomas served as witnesses, standing straight and solemn in their cleanest clothes. A circuit preacher who happened to be passing through performed the service, his voice carrying clear across the gentle breeze. 3 neighboring families came, bringing food and well wishes. Even Mrs. Thornton attended, her lips pursed in that sour expression she always wore, offering congratulations that sounded more like she was attending a funeral than a wedding. Evelyn wore a dress she had sewn herself from blue calico. She had finally set aside her mourning black, but the new dress was simple and practical, nothing fancy. She carried wildflowers she had picked that morning, prairie roses and blue flax, their stems tied together with a ribbon that had belonged to Clara. Luke wore his Sunday best and could not stop smiling. His weathered face kept breaking into grins that he could not control no matter how hard he tried to look properly serious for the ceremony. The vows were traditional: love, honor, cherish, in sickness and health, until death parted them. The words felt different this time, Luke thought, more real, more weighted with meaning. He had spoken wedding vows before, long ago, to a young woman who died in childbirth along with the baby. He had thought he would never marry again. But life had other plans. When Luke slipped the ring onto Evelyn's finger, his mother's ring that he had saved for years, his hand trembled slightly. Evelyn's fingers closed around his, steadying him. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher said. "You may kiss your bride." Luke kissed her gently, reverently. Evelyn's hands rested on his shoulders, warm and solid. The small gathering applauded. Miguel whistled. Old Thomas wiped at his eyes when he thought nobody was looking. There was cake afterward, or something that was supposed to be cake. Miguel had attempted baking for the occasion and produced something edible, if remarkably dense. Evelyn laughed when she tried it, then promised to teach him proper technique. The neighbors left as evening approached, heading back to their own claims and chores. The preacher mounted his horse and continued on his circuit. That night, Evelyn stood in Luke's cabin, their cabin now, looking at the home she would share with him. It was larger than her place, better built to withstand the Wyoming winters. There was room for her books on the shelves, her fiddle on the wall. Room for a life. "We can bring your things tomorrow," Luke said. "Whatever you want from your place." "I would like to keep my claim," Evelyn said carefully. "If that is all right with you. Maybe use it for summer pasture or—" "It is yours to keep," Luke interrupted gently. "I am not asking you to give up your independence." She smiled at that, a real smile that reached her eyes. "I know," she said. "That is one of the reasons I married you." The next weeks brought adjustments as they learned to share space and time. Luke rose before dawn, a habit from years of ranching. Evelyn preferred to stay up late, reading by lamplight. He was methodical and patient in his work. She was quick and intuitive, sometimes finishing tasks while he was still planning how to approach them. But they complemented each other, filling in gaps, smoothing rough edges. Evelyn taught Miguel and old Thomas to bake proper bread. The results improved dramatically. She organized Luke's chaotic record-keeping, creating a system that actually made sense. She brought music into the ranch house every evening, her fiddle filling rooms that had been too quiet for too long. Luke learned to appreciate poetry. He would sit and listen while Evelyn read Whitman or Dickinson, his eyes half closed in concentration. Sometimes he would ask her to read a particular passage again, turning the words over in his mind like polished stones. He gave her space for grief, too. Some mornings he would wake and find her already gone, knowing she had ridden to the cemetery. He never followed, never asked questions. When she returned, he had coffee waiting. One morning in late May, Evelyn suggested they visit Clara's grave together. They rode out in the golden morning light. Spring was in full bloom now, the cemetery carpeted with wildflowers. Blue flax and prairie roses and yellow buttercups nodded in the gentle breeze. Clara's grave had greened over completely. It looked peaceful now, settled. Evelyn had brought flower seeds, the same blue flax she had carried at her wedding. She knelt and planted them around the grave marker while Luke mended the cemetery fence nearby. They worked in companionable silence, the meadowlark singing above them. Old Thomas finished that stone, Luke said when Evelyn stood back to survey her work. Want to see it? He brought it from his saddlebag, a flat piece of granite, carefully carved by old Thomas's patient hands. Clara Rose Hale, born May 3rd, 1885, died January 10th, 1886, beloved daughter. It is beautiful, Evelyn whispered. Together they set the stone in place, replacing the wooden cross that had marked the grave through winter. The granite would last, would mark this place for years to come. She will always be part of us, Evelyn said, looking at the grave. Part of our story. Always, Luke agreed. They rode home slowly, savoring the warm afternoon. The cemetery disappeared behind them, but it would always be there. A place to remember, to grieve, to honor what was lost. But ahead lay their ranch, their home, their life together. Ahead lay possibility and hope, and the everyday work of building something that would last. The summer brought more changes than Evelyn had anticipated. She was pregnant by July. The knowledge came to her slowly, the way dawn comes to the prairie, gradually, then all at once. The morning sickness that had her stumbling behind the barn, the exhaustion that hit her in the afternoons like a wave, the tenderness in her breasts that reminded her with painful clarity of carrying Clara. She told Luke on a quiet evening, the two of them sitting on the porch watching fireflies dance across the meadow. His face went through several emotions at once. Joy, then fear, then something complicated that she recognized as the same thing she was feeling. "Are you happy?" he asked carefully. "I am terrified," Evelyn admitted. "But yes, happy too." Luke reached over and took her hand. "We will be careful," he said. "Whatever you need, whatever the doctor says." Evelyn squeezed his fingers. "I know." The pregnancy progressed through summer into fall. Evelyn grew round and uncomfortable, and Luke hovered like a mother hen until she snapped at him to give her space. "I am not made of glass," she told him firmly. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." But Luke could not help worrying. He had lost his first wife in childbirth. The memory haunted him, especially late at night when sleep would not come. Evelyn understood his fear. She had her own fears, memories of Clara's tiny face growing still, the weight of that small coffin in her arms. But she refused to let fear rule her. "This baby is not Clara," she told Luke one night when she found him sitting by the fire, unable to sleep. "And I am not your first wife. We cannot live expecting the worst." Luke pulled her into his arms as much as he could with her belly between them. "You are right," he said. "I know you are right." But fear did not listen to reason, and they both knew it. The baby came in early December, just as the first serious snows began to fall. Dr. Morrison rode out from town, the same doctor who had been unable to save Clara. Evelyn did not blame him for her daughter's death, but seeing his face brought back memories she had tried to bury. The labor was long and hard. Evelyn gripped Luke's hand until she thought she might break his fingers. The pain was worse than she remembered, or maybe she had just forgotten how bad it could be. When the baby finally came, crying and pink and furious at being pushed into the cold world, Evelyn sobbed with relief. "A boy," Dr. Morrison announced. "Healthy and strong." Luke stared at his son like he could not quite believe what he was seeing. The baby had dark hair and gray eyes like Clara had, like Daniel had. "What should we name him?" Luke asked. Evelyn thought about it. She had been so afraid to plan, afraid to hope, that she had not let herself consider names. "Daniel," she said finally. "After his father." Luke nodded slowly. "Daniel Lucas Hartwell," he said, trying the name out. "That sounds like a name for a rancher." Evelyn laughed, exhausted and happy and still a little afraid. He might not want to be a rancher. Then he can be whatever he wants. Luke bent and kissed her forehead. "You did good, Evelyn. You did so good." The baby nursed hungrily, his small mouth working with fierce determination. Evelyn looked down at him, at this new life she and Luke had created, and felt something shift in her chest. Clara was not replaced, would never be replaced. But this new child made space for himself alongside her memory, filling parts of Evelyn's heart that she had thought would stay empty forever. That first winter with baby Daniel was hard in some ways and easier in others. Hard because babies were exhausting. Daniel woke every few hours, hungry and crying, and Evelyn moved through her days in a fog of sleep deprivation. Easier because she was not alone this time. Luke woke with her in the night, bringing the baby to her for feeding, then walking Daniel around the room until he settled. Miguel and old Thomas made themselves useful in ways they never had before, keeping the ranch running while Luke focused on his family. And Evelyn had experience now. She knew what to do when Daniel had a fever, knew to trust her instincts when something felt wrong, knew that babies were stronger than they looked, even though they seemed so fragile. Spring came again, the second spring of her marriage to Luke. Evelyn stood at the window one morning watching the snow melt and the grass turn green, Daniel sleeping in her arms. The world was waking up again the way it always did. She thought about Clara, buried in the valley cemetery under a blanket of blue flowers that would bloom again soon. She thought about Daniel, about the son she had never expected to have. She thought about Luke, still sleeping in their bed, his face peaceful in the early light. Grief and joy, loss and love. They existed together in her heart, not canceling each other out, but making each other possible. She had learned something important in these past 2 years. You could not protect yourself from loss by refusing to love. The walls you built to keep out pain also kept out everything else. The only way forward was to risk it, to love anyway, knowing that loss was possible, knowing that pain might come. It was the bravest thing a person could do. Daniel stirred in her arms, making soft baby sounds. Evelyn looked down at him and smiled. "Let me tell you about your sister," she whispered. "Her name was Clara, and she was beautiful." She began to talk, telling Daniel about the sister he would never meet. The words came easily now. They did not hurt the way they used to. Clara would always be part of their story. And that was exactly as it should be, Mrs. Thornton came calling on a spring afternoon when Daniel was 4 months old and the prairie was awash in wildflowers. Evelyn saw the wagon approaching and felt her stomach tighten. She had not forgotten the woman's whispered gossip in the general store, the pointed comments about propriety and charity. She had not forgotten how it felt to be judged by someone who knew nothing about her life. But she was Luke Hartwell's wife now, and that meant maintaining civil relations with the neighbors, even the unpleasant ones. She met Mrs. Thornton at the door with a polite smile. "Good afternoon. How kind of you to visit." Mrs. Thornton swept past her into the cabin, her eyes taking in every detail. The clean floors, the comfortable furniture, the baby sleeping in his cradle by the fire. "I brought you a casserole," Mrs. Thornton said, thrusting a covered dish at Evelyn. "New mothers need their strength." "Thank you," Evelyn replied. "That is very thoughtful." They sat at the table with coffee, making awkward small talk about the weather and the state of the roads. Mrs. Thornton kept glancing at Daniel in his cradle, her expression unreadable. "He is a handsome child," she said finally. "Looks strong." "He is," Evelyn agreed. "I lost a baby once," Mrs. Thornton said abruptly. "Years ago, a little girl. She did not live past her first week." Evelyn stared at her, surprised into silence. "I never talk about it," Mrs. Thornton continued. Her voice had lost its usual sharp edge. It was softer now, almost vulnerable. "My husband thought it best to move on, not dwell on sad things. But I think about her every day. Wonder what she would have become." "I am sorry," Evelyn said. She meant it. For the first time, she saw something behind Mrs. Thornton's pursed lips and judging eyes. Pain. The same pain Evelyn knew too well. "I was cruel to you," Mrs. Thornton said, "before I said things about you and Mr. Hartwell. I was wrong." Evelyn did not know how to respond to this. She had expected many things from this visit, but not an apology. "Why?" she asked. Mrs. Thornton looked down at her coffee cup. "Because seeing you reminded me of what I lost, of what I was not brave enough to face. You buried your child yourself. I could not even look at mine. My husband took care of everything while I lay in bed with the curtains drawn." She looked up, meeting Evelyn's eyes. "I resented your strength. That is the truth of it. I thought if I could make you seem improper, it would make me feel better about my own weakness." Evelyn was quiet for a moment, processing this unexpected confession. "Grief makes us do strange things," she said finally. "I do not hold it against you." Mrs. Thornton's eyes grew wet. She blinked rapidly, struggling to maintain composure. "You are kinder than I deserve." "I am not kind," Evelyn said. "I am just tired of carrying bitterness. It is too heavy." They sat together in silence. Something had shifted between them. Not friendship exactly, but perhaps understanding. "Would you like to hold him?" Evelyn asked, nodding toward Daniel's cradle. Mrs. Thornton's face transformed. The hard lines softened. For just a moment, she looked like a different person entirely. "May I?" Evelyn lifted Daniel from his cradle and placed him in Mrs. Thornton's arms. The older woman held him awkwardly at first, then more confidently as muscle memory returned. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Aren't you a sweet thing?" Daniel cooed and grabbed at her finger with his tiny hand. Mrs. Thornton smiled, a real smile that erased years from her face. They talked for another hour after that. About babies and grief, and the strange ways that loss shaped people. Mrs. Thornton told Evelyn about her daughter, a story she had never shared with anyone. Evelyn told her about Clara, about the frozen ground and the kindness of strangers. By the time Mrs. Thornton left, something had healed between them. Not completely, but enough. "That was unexpected," Luke said when Evelyn told him about the visit later. "She lost a child too," Evelyn explained. "Years ago. She never dealt with it properly." Luke nodded slowly. "I guess you never know what people are carrying." "No," Evelyn agreed. "You never do." She thought about that as she prepared dinner that evening. About all the people walking around with hidden pain, hidden grief, hidden stories. About how easy it was to judge without understanding. Maybe that was the real lesson in all of this. Not just that grief could be survived, but that compassion could grow from shared pain. That the things that hurt us could also connect us if we let them. Mrs. Thornton came back the following week, and the week after that. She brought preserves and fabric and advice about teething. She held Daniel and told him stories about her own lost daughter. They never became close friends. They were too different for that. But they became something better than enemies, something like allies in the battle against grief. And that was enough. 1 year after they married, Luke took Evelyn back to the cemetery where they had first met. It was May again. The prairie was green and gold with wildflowers. The cottonwood tree had leafed out fully, its branches swaying in the gentle breeze. Clara's grave was beautiful. The blue flax Evelyn had planted had spread, creating a carpet of delicate blue flowers around the granite stone. It looked like a garden now, not a grave. She would have been 2 this month, Evelyn said quietly. Luke put his arm around her shoulders. Tell me something about her, he said, something happy. Evelyn thought for a moment. She used to grab my nose when I nursed her, she said, smiling at the memory. Just reach up and grab it with her tiny fingers. Like she wanted to make sure I was real. Sounds like she had a good grip on things already. Evelyn laughed softly. She did. She was determined, even at 8 months. You could see it in her eyes. They stood together in comfortable silence. The meadowlark sang above them. Butterflies danced among the flowers. Daniel is healthy, Evelyn said, growing like a weed. He gets that from you. Luke grinned. Stubborn and strong. I am not stubborn. Whatever you say, dear. Evelyn swatted his arm, but she was smiling. She knelt by the grave and touched the stone. I brought you a brother, Clara, she said softly. His name is Daniel. He has your eyes. She placed a small bundle of wildflowers against the stone, the same prairie roses and blue flax she had carried at her wedding. I will always love you, she whispered. Always. Luke helped her stand. They walked back to their horses, hand in hand. Thank you, Evelyn said. For what? For coming here with me. For not being afraid of her memory. Luke squeezed her hand. She is part of you. How could I be afraid of that? They rode home slowly, savoring the beautiful day. The ranch came into view, smoke rising from the chimney where Miguel was probably attempting to cook something. Home, Evelyn thought. This was home now. She had rebuilt her life from frozen ground. From grief so deep she thought she would drown in it. From loneliness so sharp it cut like a knife. But she had survived. More than survived. She had learned to live again, to love again, to hope again. And that was the miracle, really. Not that pain went away, because it never did, not completely. But that joy could exist alongside it. That a heart broken by loss could still find room for new love. The summer stretched ahead of them, full of possibility, cattle to tend, gardens to grow, a son to raise, and somewhere, in a valley cemetery covered in wildflowers, a little girl rested peaceful and loved, and never forgotten. That evening, Evelyn played her fiddle on the porch while Luke held Daniel on his knee. The music drifted across the prairie, joyful and haunting both. Old Thomas and Miguel sat on the steps, listening. The horses in the corral stood quiet, ears pricked toward the sound. Evelyn played all the songs she knew, the ones her mother taught her, the ones she had made up herself, the ones that reminded her of Clara and Daniel and everyone she had loved and lost. When she finally stopped, the silence was full and sweet. That was beautiful, Luke said. Thank you. Play one more? Evelyn thought for a moment. Then she played a new song, one she had never played before. It came from somewhere deep inside her, from a place where grief and joy mixed together into something stronger than either alone. The notes hung in the evening air like promises, like hope, like love. 5 years later, Evelyn stood on her porch watching her children play in the yard. Daniel was 5 now, sturdy and strong, with his father's quiet determination and his mother's gray eyes. He was chasing his sister around the garden, both of them shrieking with laughter. Sarah was 3, named for Luke's sister who had died of scarlet fever so long ago. She had Luke's brown eyes and Evelyn's stubbornness, a combination that kept them all on their toes. Be careful, Evelyn called out. Don't trample the tomatoes. Yes, Mama, Daniel shouted back, promptly running straight through the tomato patch. Evelyn shook her head, but she was smiling. Luke came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. They are going to destroy that garden, he observed. Probably, but I can plant another one. That is true. They watched their children play, the late afternoon sun painting everything gold. Do you remember, Evelyn said, when you found me in that cemetery? Luke was quiet for a moment. I remember, he said. I remember thinking I had never seen anyone so determined. Or so alone. I was both. You are neither now. Evelyn leaned back against him. No, she agreed, I am not. The years had been good to them. Not easy because life on the frontier was never easy, but good. The ranch had prospered. Their family had grown. The grief that had once threatened to swallow her whole had become something she could carry, a weight that no longer crushed her. She still visited Clara's grave every month, still planted flowers there every spring, still talked to her daughter about everything that was happening, about Daniel and Sarah and Luke, and the life Evelyn had built from the ashes of tragedy. But the visits did not hurt the way they used to. They had become peaceful, a way of honoring what was lost while celebrating what remained. "Mama," Sarah shouted, running toward the porch. "Daniel found a frog. Is it a big frog or a little frog?" "Big. This big." Sarah held her arms wide apart, exaggerating wildly. Luke laughed. "I should probably supervise," he said. "Probably," Evelyn agreed. He kissed her cheek and went to examine the frog with their children. Evelyn watched them, her heart full to bursting. She had learned something in these years since Clara died, something important. You could not protect yourself from loss by refusing to live. The frozen ground would thaw eventually, whether you were ready or not. The only choice was what you did when spring came. You could stay buried in grief, frozen and alone, or you could plant something new and watch it grow. Evelyn had chosen to plant, to risk, to love again, even knowing that love could be lost. And here was the harvest. 2 healthy children, a good man who loved her, a home filled with laughter and music and all the messy, beautiful chaos of living. Clara would always be part of her story. The daughter she had lost would never be forgotten. But she was no longer the only story, just one chapter in a life that kept writing itself forward. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Luke carried Sarah back to the porch, the little girl chattering about the frog, which had apparently escaped. Daniel followed, already planning how to catch it tomorrow. "Time for dinner," Evelyn said. "Wash up, both of you." The children ran inside, still arguing about frogs. Luke stayed on the porch with Evelyn, watching the last of the sunset. "Happy?" he asked. Yes, it was the truth. Not a perfect happiness, because such things did not exist, but a real happiness, earned through grief and struggle and the daily choice to keep going. She had learned that happiness was not the absence of pain. It was the presence of joy alongside it, the ability to hold both at once, to let them exist together. The stars began to appear one by one in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, in a valley cemetery covered in blue flowers, Clara rested peaceful and loved. And somewhere here, in a cabin filled with light and laughter, her mother lived on. Not just survived, lived. That was the miracle of the human heart. Its capacity to break and heal and break again. Its stubborn insistence on love even when love brought pain. Its determination to thaw, no matter how frozen the ground became. Evelyn took Luke's hand. "Let's go inside," she said. They walked into their home, into the warmth and noise of their family, into the life they had built together from frozen ground and impossible hope. The door closed behind them. Outside, the stars shone bright and cold, and somewhere the wind carried the sound of a fiddle, playing songs of loss and love and everything between. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.